Welcome in to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Benjamin Wolk. As always, got Jordan D. Hill in the house, and we've got a relatively unplanned Stay Wolk UGA recruiting edition, but another great show in here nonetheless. Jordan hit me this week with you think people would rather have a Charlotte preview or would they rather talk some recruiting? And I said, you know what, given what's all been going on, let's squeeze in an impromptu 2 weeks away from signing day, Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show edition in there because there is a lot that's gone on in the last week and there's a lot that's going to be going on this upcoming weekend, even though it is Charlotte week. So because of the spontaneity of it all, we don't have a guest for you, but there is plenty to talk about. Commitments, official visits coming up, which is something we don't talk about a ton during the football season anymore. And of course, we'll have some segments at the end with arrow pointing up and predict a commit. Jordan, I will say, for the person that turned this on and is pissed at us that we're not doing a full-on Charlotte preview, I'm going to start the show off for them. I'm leaving the floor open to you, but give us some Georgia-Charlotte takes for this upcoming Saturday.
Charlotte's really bad, Ben, which is the main reason I texted you. They're 1-9. Their defense is a wreck. I think they lost 28-7 to UTSA, a solid UTSA team last week. This is just not going to be a competitive game, and it's a week. I don't know, Ben, if you really looked at the college football slate for week 13, but on the whole, it is awful. And this is a game where Georgia wants to get through it, get healthy, maybe play some backups and get those guys some reps. But yeah, just looking through the numbers, sometimes you try to want to, well, we could talk about this. We could talk about that. No, this Charlotte team's bad. But I will shout out, hey, Colin Gill, former Georgia player. I got a story up on Thursday about him. But this is a bad team. Georgia, as long as it doesn't play with its food, there shouldn't be a ton to talk about out of this one.
Yeah, for perspective on just how bad, like we have some analytics that we look at every week that are sort of like, okay, what kind of team is this? Where are they strong? Where are they weak? One of the worst analytics charts I've ever seen. I think they're 135th nationally in EPA margin, 135th nationally in offensive EPA margin. They're 106th nationally, or 136th nationally, rather, I believe, out of 136. In defensive success rate, 135th in both drop back and rush defensive success rate. So among the worst analytics teams in the country, to go along with the fact that they're going to be very, very outmatched in this one.
Like we did the Marshall preview, and I don't remember what we did for Austin Peay, but when it's early in the year, we can say, well, it's still kind of meaningful, even if Georgia is very clearly the superior team. We can find out, maybe get a glimpse of some guys we didn't expect to play big roles this year. You get to see that in early competition. Who are the young guys that are still kind of scrapping for playing time? And you get this far in the year, and it's like, man, get through it without getting hurt and get ready for Georgia Tech next week.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a whole lot to talk about with the Georgia Charlotte game. I guess if there's one thing that there is to potentially be excited about, I get the feeling, especially this fact that Kirby Smart made a comment about it during this week. This is going to be the Gunnar Stockton stat chasing Heisman campaign game, I think. I mean, obviously next week against Georgia Tech is what ultimately will dictate whether he gets to New York or not. But if he goes out and pads like a 6 touchdown, no interception, gets a bunch of yards with his legs and with his arm type of game, I could see that inflating his stock even further going into that Georgia Tech game.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, really the biggest thing is how long is he going to play? But, yeah, that'll probably be one of a few storylines you'll want to pay attention to on Saturday.
All right. That's enough Charlotte talk, Jordan. That's more than enough Charlotte talk. We've got some recruiting updates to talk about and some things that are going to be coming up here this upcoming weekend as well. And it really is that time of year, like I already alluded to. Somehow, some way, we're 2 weeks away from signing day, where we are going to be putting together a fun little signing day show for you as well. But Georgia added 2 big commitments this past weekend, before the Texas game and then after the Texas game. And neither of them were really surprises. These were things that were, staged weeks in advance in terms of when they were going to be announcing things and how they were going to be announcing things, but 2 big commitments nonetheless. So we'll start with the 2027 class, and that is Georgia running back commit Noah Parker, formerly known as Jacavion Parker, which I've said it once, I've said it again. I would recommend Jacavion. I can just picture Jacavion Parker getting drafted to fantasy football teams in 5 years. But nonetheless, this is a big time pickup for Georgia, and someone that we know Georgia has a history in South Georgia of finding guys before the rest of the world finds them. And I think that's exactly what's happened here with Noah Parker. He's 5'10". I think we've got him at 5'9", 198. I think he's measured in at Georgia at 5'10", 200. This is a guy that had 19 rushing touchdowns during the regular season at Macon County. I don't care what level of football you're playing against, who you're playing against. If you have 20 rushing touchdowns, you're going to be on Georgia's radar. We know that Georgia has a track record in Macon County. Everybody's going to bring up Roquan Smith. I think Noah Parker's brought it up. There have been a handful of guys through the years that have been Power 4 caliber college football players, and they all end up at Georgia. It's just that's in the identity down there at Macon County. He even joked with me. This was probably after his first visit earlier this season. So this was his third visit of the season, but it was his first visit earlier this season, either for Marshall or Austin Peay. I can't remember at this point, but he said that whenever Kirby Smart sees him, Kirby Smart looks at him and says, Macon County. And I think that tells you a lot that like Kirby Smart's well aware of the history that Georgia has at Macon County. It's going to be very hard for a guy that Georgia wants that's from Macon County to slip out of the Bulldogs' grasp. I know that a lot of people that are stargazing folks, and it sounds hypocritical for me to say that as someone that works for 24/7 Sports, and we just put out our rankings yesterday, and I say regularly how rankings do matter, but I just think it's so early in the 2027 class that there's so many updates that are going to happen. I think Georgia's just ahead of the game here in terms of what they've seen from Noah Parker and their willingness to take his commitment this early. I should say I'm leaning toward right now Georgia taking 3 running backs in the 2027 recruiting class. Right now, Georgia only has 1 commitment in the 2026 class. I would assume they'll probably do something portal related at that position, considering they've done that 2 years in a row. There's always the chance that Georgia is hanging around for some 2026 running back in the high school ranks that we'll learn about more over the next 2 weeks. So subscribe to Dawgs 24/7 for that, because that is one position group where I'm keeping an eye on things just in case they end up doing something in the 2026 class. But as it relates to the 2027 class, I've had a lot of people ask me, what does this mean for Andrew Beard? What does this mean for David Gabriel Georges or Kamon Spells or some of these other elite running backs that Georgia's recruiting? And I'm saying not a whole lot. Like, they want to take 3. Going and getting a guy from Macon County, Georgia, that was probably going to end up at Georgia no matter what, isn't going to alter how Georgia recruits other players at that position and the interest level that those players would have in Georgia with a player like that in the class. I mean, you look at the in-state group: Andrew Jerry Beard, Nigel Newkirk out of Gainesville High School, Boobie Gibson out of Kell High School, Braden Tyson as well, D'Angelo Tyson's son at Brookwood High School. I mean, those are the in-state guys that I would keep an eye on. And then out of state, I mentioned David Gabriel Georges at Baylor School and Chattanooga. Kamon Spell is the top 10 back that Georgia offered recently and visited for the Texas game. And then Amari Irvin is from IMG Academy, which I only bring him up. He hasn't been closely linked to Georgia nationally, I wouldn't say. But I will say, and we'll talk about this more here in a minute, but when we had Zach Fort on the show back in February when he committed to Georgia, I was playing the dog or not game with him about IMG Academy teammates. And sure, he wasn't right about all of them. He said that, Brett Collegier would be a dog. He had said that Kenyi Pepe would be a dog. That didn't end up happening. But he did say that Preston Carey would be a dog when I did not think that would be the case. And when I talked to him after the show, he was like, I thought you were going to ask me more about some of the younger guys. I was like, oh, really? Who are the younger guys that you would mention? And the 2 guys that he mentioned were Jayden Wade and Amari Irvin. So there's clearly something there, and there's a relationship there with Zach Fort and Georgia, and Georgia's relationship at IMG with some of those guys as well. So that's another name that I would put in there from the out-of-state group that I wouldn't rule out, just given how Georgia has recruited that kind of friend group, I guess you could say, down there at IMG Academy right now. But Jordan, I know there was a lot of banter on our board whenever Georgia adds a 3-star running back. Everyone wants to have an opinion, but I don't think there's any doubt in Georgia's world and in the mind of the people that are recruiting him that this is one of the better running backs in the state of Georgia.
Yeah, when I picture in my head like all of the staff are in a meeting and they put someone up to kind of pitch a recruit and they get up there and they're like, all right, we got a South Georgia running back, and then they just say, stop. Okay, we're in. Like you don't have to sell us any more than that. A shout out to Chris on YouTube says Noah and Roquan Smith are cousins too, which I can't say that surprises me. Down in a small town like that, I'm sure pretty much everybody's related to everybody. But
Yeah, I was
Ben,
gonna
if you
say, I was sitting there thinking, I was like, is that accurate? I don't know. Like, I know that they know each other well, and I've even talked with Noah about some of his conversations with Roquan. So, Chris, shout out if you're on that one. Shout out to you on that, and I need to do my homework there.
Yeah, if you want me to fire up the highlights real quick while we talk, I
Yeah,
can do that for
absolutely. I
the.
love this dude's game. I mean, he's obviously shorter to the ground, but he just has that instinctive vision that you see from a lot of these South Georgia running backs. Obviously, playing in a lower classification, but again, when you're rushing for 20 touchdowns in a season, um, I don't really care what classification you're playing in. And we know that this is a 99 yarder, by the way, that he's about to take to the house here. So, I mean, he's got that complete breakaway speed that you need to.
No, I mean the biggest thing is, I mean he looks the part, and we talk a lot on the show about just kind of trusting Georgia's evaluations at certain positions, and like inside linebacker is probably the most obvious one, tight ends right there, but it's like running back too. Like they know how to go find these guys, and my thing too, what should give you confidence. Like, yeah, they love taking guys in state, but they've shown they'll go across the country for the right guy. So to me, this isn't like, well, this guy's in state, so we got to take him. Georgia's had such a run of luck recruiting California and pulling running backs out of there. So to me, that just speaks to what they really like about Noah Parker's game. And they're like, well, we like this guy. We know what he's about. And he looks like the genuine article to me, man. He looks like he's a guy that can come to Georgia and fit right in.
And when Georgia hired Josh Crawford, one of the big reasons they hired Josh Crawford as the running backs coach was because of his ties and built-in relationships in South Georgia. Like he'd coached at Colquitt, he'd coached at Lee County, he'd coached at there are a few other schools in South Georgia. And so all that to say, like one of the expectations I'm sure that Kirby Smart had when he hired Josh Crawford as running backs coach is, I want you to identify the right guys in South Georgia that Georgia should be bringing in at running back. It's not just who's the highly recruited guy, who's the guy that everybody already knows is the 5-star. It's who is the guy based on your relationships down there in South Georgia. Do you have an understanding that all the football minds down in South Georgia find to be the best running backs down that way? And he did that with Jay Lamar. I think in this case, he's doing it with Noah Parker as well.
No, I mean, to me, from what I've seen, sign me up. If you're a Georgia fan, I think there's a lot to be excited about. Whatever you call him, Noah, whatever. Call him a future star. I think he's got a lot of potential, especially once he gets to Georgia.
The fact that you can get a running back commitment, we're sort of at the point now, like technically we're still in the 2026 class. We've got 2 weeks until signing day, but the way that these schools are recruiting behind the scenes now, the attention is gradually shifting more and more into the 2027 class. So when you're getting a 2027 commitment at a priority, marketable position like Noah Parker, it's rare that is kind of the second fiddle commitment of the weekend, especially when the other one is coming from an even further out recruiting class. But that's sort of what happened with Jayden Wade and Georgia 2028 recruiting class. Quarterback Jayden Wade from IMG Academy committed to Georgia on Sunday. He had been at the Texas game. The writing was pretty much on the wall there in terms of the interest level that he had shown into Georgia, the amount of times that he had visited Georgia, the fact that he was Georgia's number one target in the class at the quarterback position, but really any position in the 2028 recruiting class. He visited for a game earlier this season. He announced that he was going to have a November 16th commitment date, and he visited Georgia for the Texas game right before that. I don't think you had to read between the lines too hard to figure out what was going on there, even though admittedly when he first announced that he wasn't on the schedule to be at the Georgia-Texas game, and he announced he was committing on November 16th. I was a little alarmed that Georgia was trying to make a push that early while they were still trying to figure things out with Jared Curtis. I was like, getting into quarterback recruitments like this is just, more than I would have bargained for, but something that Georgia had no issue with. And clearly when Jayden Wade spoke about it, this was something that he'd had in his plans for a long time. Like, I think you could say when he visited in the spring, he probably knew that he was going to end up at Georgia. He came back in the summer. He probably knew that he was going to end up at Georgia when he was at Georgia for the Alabama game earlier this season. I think that he knew that he was going to end up at Georgia, and really all along he had planned to make this commitment. This is the number one player in the 2028 recruiting class. That makes him the number one quarterback. That makes him the number one player in Florida out of IMG Academy. A reminder, IMG Academy is the number one ranked high school football team in the country, and this is their quarterback, and he's only a sophomore. He had 20 touchdowns, 2 interceptions this season, gets involved in the run game too, is averaging about 8 yards per carry, had a handful of touchdowns on the ground. So just an uber productive guy, and no questions asked. This was Georgia's number one priority in the 2028 recruiting class. You got to give a lot of credit to Mike Bobo, the fact that he gets the number one quarterback target for Georgia in the 2026 recruiting class, and Jared Curtis. You know that they're probably going to have to see a little bit of a recruiting lull in the 2027 class because of the way you have to stack your quarterback classes. And then for him to go and get Jayden Wade in the 2028 class this early as the number one target that Georgia really prioritized as being that guy in the 2028 class, you've got to give Mike Bobo a ton of credit. I think I said this a couple weeks ago. I don't remember if we were on air or off air. I feel like the Mike Bobo approval rating is as high as it's ever been. Like what he's doing on the field, what he's done with Gunnar Stockton, what they've done with the run game, the creativity of the offensive play calling, the way they've stepped up in big spots when they had to have it in big games. But for him to now, I know there's still some ongoing drama with the Jared Curtis recruitment, but with going and getting this guy in the 2028 class, a lot of credit has to go to Mike Bobo. I should say you also should give credit to Georgia cornerbacks coach, defensive backs coach, Dante Williams. Jayden Wade's from Corona, California. That's also where Zach Fort is from. Those two guys have known each other since childhood, Zach Fort and Jayden Wade. Georgia probably isn't as in it as early with Jayden Wade as they were had they not been in it as early as they were with Zach Fort. We know Georgia took Zach Fort way early in the 2026 recruiting cycle back in February before he really had taken a bunch of visits other places. I think that majorly helped in their ability to get Jayden Wade. Dante Williams was heavily involved in the relationships there as well. He actually coached Dante Williams early in his coaching career. A lot of people that are really close to Jayden Wade's recruitment as well. And so got to give Dante Williams a lot of the credit too. And shout out Zach Fort too, because he was the first person that ever mentioned to me in any conversation that I ever had that he thought that Jayden Wade would end up at Georgia one day. And I know end up at Georgia one day might be a stretch because there's still, a year and a half, 2 years before he ends up signing. But Zach Fort was certainly on this one very, very early. Big time pickup for Georgia, Jordan, in the 2028 recruiting class.
No doubt about it. And here in a second, I'll pull up his highlights and you can kind of talk about his game. But the thing to me, it kind of goes back to the Mike Bobo piece of it. And Mike Bobo's had a week. The offense played great against Texas. They had a lull in that third quarter and then 21 points in the fourth. We're talking about Gunnar Stockton as a potential Heisman candidate. I thought watching the game back, Mike had the Texas defense on its heels. A lot of misdirection, a lot of eye candy that caught Texas off guard. They pick up Jayden Wade on Sunday. Things are trending in the right direction, and Mike Bobo deserves a lot of credit. I still see some national people out there being like, all this Mike Bobo talk, you guys are being ridiculous. Hey, man, I've criticized him as much as anybody. I think Mike has done a great job in picking up Jayden Wade. That's just another feather in his cap of what's been a very productive fall.
I'll bring out a Kirbyism real quick when it comes to Mike Bobo as well. Like, it's never as good as it seems. It's never as bad as it seems. I think that's always been the case with Mike Bobo. It's never been nearly as bad as anyone's ever made it out to be. He's often been made to be a scapegoat in certain situations. Is he like, I know I've heard some people chattering about him winning the Broyles Award. He very well might win the Broyles Award. I don't want it to become this thing now where we think that Mike Bobo is infallible, because no offensive play caller in world history has ever been infallible. Like, you're going to eventually have some 3 and outs. You're going to have to punt. Your teams are going to turn the ball over. It's just the way that it is. But I think that right now he has his offense firing on as many cylinders as Georgia has ever operated offensively. On the Jayden Wade front, 6'3", 190 pounds. I think you see right away that he has all of the natural tools. He layers the football. He has a really strong arm. I mean, he's a multi-sport athlete, so I think you see a lot of that show up. Quick twitch, quick release, gets rid of the ball really, really well. The thing that stands out to me here, and you'll see him obviously right there, he makes a throw with pressure. He gets the ball around to a lot of different receivers. You go look at IMG statistics, like Eric McFarland is their leading pass catcher, and he is a dynamite player in the 2028 recruiting class as well. But they really feed the rock to everybody around. I think it replicates a lot what Georgia does offensively, where you just don't have that one go-to guy. Like, they want to have that versatility factor on the offense. And I think why Jayden Wade is the number one player in the country and why he was Georgia's priority target at any position in the 2028 recruiting class is because of his knowledge of the game. And for him to be able to do it as a sophomore is really, really impressive. He's always going to the right place with the football. He's always making things easier for his teammates and giving his receivers opportunities to make plays after the catch. And I bring that up to say, whenever I think about Jayden Wade, what stands out to me is conversations that I've had, and I'm not sure if it was this summer or this spring. I believe it was this spring that he had the opportunity to sit down and do some board work with Georgia coaches, X's and O's, breaking down plays, drawing up some of his favorite plays, coaches putting defensive scheme in front of him and what he would do to make certain checks. And from what I've been told, it was one of the more impressive sessions that anybody's ever had. And I think that says a lot because he's a sophomore in high school. And the fact that he already has that level of thinking at that position as a 2028 recruit, it helps you understand why Georgia's trying to go and get this guy as early as he is. Like, Georgia's not just going and getting any Joe Schmo in the 2028 recruiting class this early. And that tells you a lot about Jayden Wade, and it tells you a lot about Asa Wall, the two guys that they have committed in the 2028 recruiting class right now. I mean, these are highly graded, high priority prospects in Athens, Georgia, and that's why you're seeing them in the class as early as you are.
I mean, just watching the highlights right here with everybody else, I mean, his arm immediately stands out. And again, to keep in mind that he's just a sophomore and the potential that he has. And I think sometimes we take for granted how valuable it is to get that quarterback in a class early on, because you kind of lean on that guy to kind of be that Pied Piper to help other guys come in. You hope that there's potential that receivers will look at him and say, oh, well, Georgia's got Jayden Wade. Maybe we should, maybe I should consider going to Georgia too. Very impressed just with what I've seen. I got a note, seeing a lot of plays against Central Phoenix City, and I'm really not taking this as a shot at Central. That tells me how good he is and how good this IMG team, how good this IMG Academy team is, because Central is a powerhouse in Alabama, and he's stepping up. He's making plays. He just makes some of these throws to the flats just look so easy. I think there's a lot to be excited for. And I know Georgia fans are going to say, this guy's in 2028. He may never even get to Georgia. Look, man, it's still a win right now. To put yourself at the forefront of this recruitment, make another team beat you for this guy. Georgia deserves a lot of credit. This is a guy that we're not going to be done talking about anytime soon.
Completely agreed. I will add, and I brought him up a second ago, there's so much to be done in the 2027 class. It's impossible to talk about the 2028 class for a lot of folks when it's not at the quarterback position. But this is Jayden Wade's leading receiver at IMG Academy, Eric McFarland. I've had the opportunity to see him in a couple of 7-on-7 settings this year, which I know is not everything, but when you put the film that he puts forward to go along with what he does in the 7-on-7 settings, this is one of the most impressive athletes that I've seen. He has visited for a Georgia game earlier this season as well. So I bring that up to say it's going to be majorly helpful that Georgia has Jayden Wade in this class already. With a lot of other guys, he is going to be a Pied Piper type in the 2028 recruiting class. But I think that having Eric McFarland right there catching passes from him for 3 straight years is going to go a long way. And who knows what Georgia is going to do at the receiver position between now and then. But I know that nationally, the vibes around being a Georgia wide receiver is as high as it's ever been right now, with some of the things that Noah Thomas has done out of the portal, with some of the things that Zachariah Branch has done out of the portal, some of the things that Colby Young was doing out of the portal beforehand, Dylan Bell. Like, the interest level from receivers is higher than it is right now. And as we know from our rankings, Craig Dandridge just jumped into the top 100 and is the highest ranked receiver in Georgia now too. So they're already making waves in the 2026 class as well. All right, Jordan, there's going to be a bunch of people on campus for visits this weekend, but we're going to talk about 3 of them because they are the 3 most important visitors from the weekend. We said a few episodes back, a really telling sign this time of year for Georgia is if you're a 2026 recruit that comes in on an official visit, we need to start taking you very, very seriously. And that was the case when Jermaine Mitchell came on his official visit earlier in the year. We were talking about it previously with one of these guys and why it was, something that we needed to keep an eye on. But now there are going to be 3 official visitors this upcoming weekend. And quite frankly, not beating around the bush, not saying these recruitments are done, but if you are taking an official visit to Georgia this time of year, the chances of you ending up at Georgia are drastically higher than you ending up anywhere else. And so we're going to talk about those 3 guys, where things sort of stand with each of their recruitments, what to watch out for, what we're hearing on our end. But as always, please go subscribe to Dawgs247.com because we are going to provide you more minute-to-minute details around these things there than we're going to be able to do on this live show. But the first one I'll bring up is a guy that I talked about last week, and that is Blake Stewart, defensive back, previously committed to Clemson from Woodward Academy. Someone that would play safety at Georgia, someone that we talked about because he was on a visit to Georgia last week for the Texas game. It was the first visit that he'd made to Georgia since he had decommitted from Clemson. I'm a big fan of this prospect. He is all the intangibles that you would look for. He's going to check all of those boxes when it comes to leadership, communication, academics, like all of those types of things. Blake Stewart checks all of those boxes. I also think he is one of the smoothest athletes in the 2026 class in the state of Georgia. He plays both sides of the ball for Woodward Academy. He probably could play receiver at the next level if you asked him to, but he's someone that would play safety at Georgia. I think things are trending in the right direction with Georgia here. That was the message that I got coming out of the weekend after the Texas visit. The fact that he has now immediately scheduled that official visit for the Charlotte game, I think tells you a whole lot. The 2 schools that I would keep an eye on, Miami is a place that he did visit while he was still committed to Clemson. And then Vanderbilt is the school that he visited immediately after decommitting from Clemson. I would say right now the pecking order I would put in is probably Georgia, Vanderbilt, Miami, which I think is a pretty good indicator that Georgia is really the team to beat here. And I think that coming out of this weekend, it's probably going to be even more so the case once he has a chance to sit down with Dante Williams, Travaris Robinson, Kirby Smart. I think it's going to be pretty hard to say no to that given the in-state poll, given what Georgia has done with defensive backs. And if Georgia were to get Blake Stewart, that would be a lot of safeties that Georgia's taking in this class. And I think that's an indicator of a couple things. One, some movement that Georgia might be expecting out of the safety room. And also, I think this year Georgia learned the hard way that you got to have as much safety depth as possible. And you know that certain guys are probably going to end up hitting the transfer portal. Like, how different would we be talking about Georgia's safety room this year if A.J. Harris was still at Georgia? We probably would be talking about it a lot differently. And so you realize that one guy transferring, a couple other guys not necessarily turning out to what you thought they were going to be, changes the entire dynamic of that room. And I think that's why you're maybe wanting to see Georgia bolster up at safety a little bit, especially knowing that cornerback looks pretty solid for the near future as well.
Yeah, with Blake Stewart, he checks a lot of boxes. And to your point, Ben, with what the room could look like next year, Ja'Cory Thomas is out of eligibility. I'm pretty sure Adrian Maddox is out of eligibility. It makes a lot of sense to try to get as many guys who can fill those roles as possible. And to me, it makes a lot of sense to me looking at Blake Stewart. We'll see if they can hold off a Vanderbilt or a Miami. But my thing, I'm not the recruiting whiz that you are or any of the people who cover recruiting on a daily basis, but you follow the visits, man. Where are they going? Especially this time of year, like you said. I think that tells you a lot about where Georgia is in this pecking order.
Another guy that we have known was going to be on an official visit, if you've been subscribed over at Dawgs247.com, I think it was Anna Adams from our national team. She was the first to put this out there, but we've been talking about it for a couple of weeks now that Elijah Littlejohn, linebacker from West Charlotte, North Carolina, previously committed to Penn State, that he would be visiting for the Texas game, and then he would be following that up with an official visit for the Charlotte game. Once again, we know what's happened with Georgia in the linebacker position this year. We know Georgia has Nick Abrams in the class. They missed on the 3 in-state guys that Georgia would have really been recruiting, which were Tyler Atkinson, Xavier Griffin, and Braden Rouse. I'm not ruling out that Georgia's staying in communication with some of those guys. I just think the likelihood of any of those guys ending up in Georgia is pretty slim at this point. And so once Shadarius Tootle flipped to Auburn, and I don't expect Georgia to really try and get back into the mix with Shadarius Tootle, who's it going to be? We know Georgia's not going to take one linebacker in a class. Rarely are they going to take 2. I still think that there's a chance they take 3 in this recruiting cycle, but Elijah Littlejohn has immediately emerged as the player that I would consider the top candidate to be the linebacker in the class. You took him with your predict-to-commit team in the last episode, very savvy pick, and he will be now back for that official visit. I don't have a ton to say here other than Georgia immediately got in the mix once he decommitted from Penn State, or really it was James Franklin got fired. Georgia immediately got back in the mix. Elijah Littlejohn really said that he was not decommitting. He was just reopening his recruitment, but it kind of was understood that he wasn't going to end up back at Penn State. And so he's now being treated as if he's not committed anywhere. And I think that he is going along as if he's not committed anywhere, even though technically speaking, he only just reopened his recruitment, but stayed committed to Penn State. I think he's going to end up at Georgia at this point, and I think that you're going to add another one here late to your predict-to-commit team, Jordan.
Yeah, trying really hard to shrink that gap between us, Ben. But no, again, I think that this is a linebacker that makes a lot of sense for Georgia. Again, trying to get at least a second guy. I think that you could do a whole lot worse than Elijah Littlejohn, and I think that we'll see how it goes this weekend, but who knows how quickly we'll get that next commitment announcement. He would be one I would have to imagine we need to be watching closely the days coming off of this visit.
One that I think I'm probably going to hit on my predict-to-commit team here with a late ad is interior offensive line target Tyreek Jemison, who I should say just jumped into the top 24/7 rankings yesterday as the number 237 player in the country. He bumped up from 3-star status to 4-star status, and ever since he decommitted from Kentucky, Georgia has been the number one factor here. He visited for the Ole Miss game the following weekend. He's now been back for the Texas game, and he has his official visit coming up this weekend. You know, I'm not expecting with any of these 3 guys for them to do anything on a whim. In fact, it probably behooves Georgia to let them do some things closer to signing day so that you can have some fun signing day buzz that goes along with things. I'm not saying 100% sure that's how it plays out, but someone that Ole Miss is hanging around. He took an official visit to Ole Miss over the summer, and they have stayed involved. Obviously, some weird things going on in the Ole Miss world right now that would probably make you a little bit uncertain as a recruit. I know Louisville's a team that's tried to get into the mix here too, and I know that Kentucky hasn't necessarily gone away since he decommitted from them. But another one, much like what I had said with Littlejohn, I don't have a whole lot to say here other than at this point, it would be surprising if this player did not end up at Georgia. And quite frankly, if this player didn't end up at Georgia, it probably would have been based on a roster numbers decision that Georgia would have had to make more so than the player wanting to go somewhere other than Georgia.
No, I thought when you made that pick, it was a great one because it seemed like, they want to add one more offensive lineman and to have a guy in state, a guy that obviously they think really highly of. I think he makes a lot of sense. And again, coming on campus this time of year, you know what to make of that.
All right, Jordan, we're going to jump to a quick ad break. When we come back, we'll do our segments, arrow pointing up, predict to commit. As always, I do want to encourage people to subscribe to Dawgs247.com. I believe we've got a flash sale going on right now, Jordan.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure and tell the folks who are watching and listening, jump on the 75% off, but it's only on Thursday. It ends at midnight Thursday night. 75% off is the best sale we're going to have all year. You might see it come back around on Black Friday, but this is a chance to get in before the last home game with these visitors. Ben's going to have all kinds of content after Saturday from how the visits went, how things look. And it's just a great time in general to join us on the Junkyard. You got Georgia football gearing up for what sure looks like a playoff run. You got Georgia basketball getting started. You got baseball still preparing for the 2026 season. So a lot to talk about, and we hope you'll join us. We have a fun time over on the Junkyard. I think if you join us, you'll have so much fun getting to keep up with Georgia and knowing that there's always something going on, Ben.
Yeah, someone's always upset about something, which is always fun. Thursday, November 20th is that flash sale. So if you're listening, if you're watching live, listening, maybe a little bit after the fact, we'll have it up on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Like, get in now on Thursday because it is a one-day flash sale. All right, we'll head to a quick ad break. When we come back, we will have segments. We will have arrow pointing up. We will have predict to commit. We'll see you on the other side. All right, Jordan, arrow pointing up. I'm going to let you start.
Yeah, I've got a couple for this one. Arrow pointing up, Atlanta Braves. Our Atlanta teams have kind of letting us down. The Hawks are doing okay, but the Braves have gotten off to a pretty good start when it comes to the postseason. Nothing too crazy, but they re-signed Raisel Iglesias. He was a guy that, I was actually at the game against the Diamondbacks with our buddy Justin Ferguson when he just totally imploded. And then second half of the season, really after that moment, he was fantastic. They re-signed him for 1 year. I thought that was a smart move. And at a point in the offseason where there's not a ton of bullpen guys you look at, not a ton of like elite closers available. And then they made a trade with the Houston Astros to get Mauricio Dubon, and they traded away Nick Allen, who the best way, Ben, I don't know if you ever do this, if one of your favorite teams makes a trade, you go look at the team that gave up the player, and you go look at the reactions on Twitter, and the Astro fans are pissed about getting Nick Allen back from Mauricio Dubon. Like, why? What are you doing? Why? That's all I needed to see. I'm totally in.
Completely agree.
Again, it's nothing sexy so far from the Braves, but that was nice to see. Astro fans are upset, and that's just kind of the cherry on top for me.
You're completely right. Anytime that the other fan base is upset about losing a player, or the worst one is when you make a trade and you're getting a player that the other team is like thrilled is no longer going to be there. That's the worst side of it. But you're exactly right. The fan base they're coming from always has the right pulse on things.
The only other one I had, and I'm saying this mainly because I don't think we'll do a Stay Wolk next week, but arrow pointing up Thanksgiving food.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if you're this way, but I love Thanksgiving food. They had Williams Brothers Barbecue for the Texas game. They had a Thanksgiving meal, and this probably says how much I love food. I've been thinking about the meal we had ever since then. Super good. Ben, do you have a favorite Thanksgiving side or a dessert or a go-to dish?
I mean, I like to make like a creamy corn, which I know corn is sometimes a little controversial as whether it's a side or not. But I have a specific cream corn that I like to make for Thanksgiving. I mean, my dad's really good on the turkey. We usually overdo it probably on the turkey. We do some ham, like we do it all. We want it all. The thing is, like, my parents have the traditional sides that they like to do. And then I'm adamant about the cream corn and Sarah's adamant about the mac and cheese. So we end up getting those duties because we want them more than anybody else does on the table. But yeah, I'm with you. I love the Williams Brothers Williamson Brothers meal that we got, one of the better press box meals. So shout out whoever made that call. I'll give the credit to Claude Felton, even though it wasn't probably his call, but I'll give it to him.
Probably not. But I just want to shout out. I love dressing, and the dressing they had there was very, very good. I'm looking forward to that on Thanksgiving. And then sweet potato souffle. It's like, oh, this isn't really dessert. It is dessert, but no, that's always good.
All right. I've got a few. One, I'll start with the arrow is pointing up on Jared Curtis chatter. And I'm not saying that it's pointing up because it's all good or all bad. I'm just saying we're in the 2-week window where there's going to be a lot of Jared Curtis chatter. For those that pay attention to this closely nationally, there were some national reports about Jared Curtis and Vanderbilt coming off of his visit to Texas. I am not ruling out that communication is still open and that Vanderbilt doesn't have a puncher's chance in this one. Everything that I'm hearing on my end is that Georgia's confidence level remains very high coming out of that Texas visit, and Georgia is fully expecting to sign him in 2 weeks. This is one of those moments where I will say subscribe to Dawgs 24/7 because there is going to be conversation about it. I think that our reporting at Dawgs 24/7 through all of the Vanderbilt saga has been pretty consistent in terms of what we were hearing coming into visits, out of visits, into visits, out of visits, when there has been some national chatter. So the arrow is pointing up on there being a lot of chatter. The arrow, I would say, is also pointing up on join us over at Dawgs 24/7 because I think that we're going to have pretty level-headed coverage when it comes to what things are actually going on with Jared Curtis moving forward.
No, I say you should just freak out, Ben. Just totally give in to it's over and there's but to be serious though, what's the harm in a little bit of intrigue leading up to signing day? I still feel good about where Georgia is, but Vanderbilt's at least giving us something to talk about. I'll give them that.
No, I'm not ruling out. We know.
Name one other time.
But I'm just gonna say, I just saw yesterday the name one that we're referencing. I'm not going to name names because I don't want it to get clipped or anything like that. There was an interesting decommitment in the college football world from a school that is relevant to this. That all I'm saying is like maybe it wasn't Georgia. Maybe it wasn't Georgia.
You did mention corn earlier when you're talking about Thanksgiving. That's also kind of fits in.
Yeah, there we go.
With the school we're not naming.
And big game, I will say, for that school this weekend with their head coach. And I know he signed an extension and whatever. All right. Arrow's also pointing up on college football scenarios. You mentioned that this is sort of a down weekend, I guess you could say, across the country. So this is a great time to sort of start playing the college football scenarios. And there's a few. Like there's the SEC scenarios. And you say there's not big games this weekend. I will add. Georgia has one scenario where they can make the SEC championship without Bama or Texas A&M losing. And that would be if Kentucky beats Vanderbilt, Florida beats Tennessee, and then Ole Miss wins the Egg Bowl. And the Ole Miss winning the Egg Bowl would be in 2 weeks. But for it to play out that way, Kentucky and Florida have to win this weekend. So if you're a Georgia fan that wants to play in the SEC championship game, or if you're a Georgia fan that doesn't want to play in the SEC championship game, have rooting interest on that side of the Kentucky-Vanderbilt game and the Florida-Tennessee game. That's something for you to be able to invest yourself into this upcoming Saturday. So that's the SEC scenarios. Then, of course, there's the college football playoff scenarios, and I love kind of I mentioned to you when we were waiting for the rankings to get announced on Tuesday, and Bama dropped to 10, and Greg McElroy had made the comments publicly that, and I get it, that it's hard to react to those things on the fly, not knowing what things are going to be happening. And of course, when there's a little bit of personal interest in it, you're going to hyper fixate on where they end up going in the rankings. And so I realized he said that there was a precedent set. Alabama dropped 6 spots. You don't want to lose this time of year because you might drop 6-7 spots, And that's not really what happened. What really happened was Oklahoma moved up a few spots because they beat Alabama. And of course, Alabama with 2 losses was going to drop behind the Oklahoma team that they had just played in the head-to-head, just like in the AP poll where Alabama jumped ahead of Georgia at the time once Alabama won that head-to-head, even though Alabama had lost to Florida State. I bring up all of that to say there's a scenario this weekend that is kind of crazy to me where it's like Oklahoma's 8 right now, feeling like they are sitting pretty in the college football playoff standings. They're playing Missouri, who's ranked 18th right now and is a 3-loss SEC team. If Oklahoma loses that game, I know everyone would assume, oh, they're going to fall out. Of course they are going to fall out. They would drop behind Missouri in the rankings, and they would drop behind Texas. So like Oklahoma's playing this game this weekend that nobody's really thinking about. And it's like, if they lose it, they're going to drop 10 spots in the rankings next week, and they're going to be 18th, and their season's going to be completely over. So Oklahoma just has an absolutely massive one this weekend, even though I know Missouri's not really, that big of a threat. Notre Dame, Miami, I don't know what they're going to do about this. And I brought this up when we did our ranking show a few weeks ago. I was like, that's the number one thing I'm looking at here. They've got Notre Dame 10 and they've got Miami 18. And so they can sit here and say, we're not really comparing those two teams because we have them so far apart. Well, now they're 10 and 13 and I guess they're 9 and 13, which dropping Alabama below Notre Dame was completely a protect yourself from Miami Notre Dame conversation move. But eventually you would think they're going to have a conversation where Notre Dame and Miami are part of the same cluster. And if that happens, I don't know how you put Notre Dame ahead of Miami in that situation. And then the other scenario that I'm tinkering with right now that I'm having fun with is, and I want your opinion on this, Jordan. Right now, Texas A&M is number 3, Georgia is number 4, Alabama is number 10. Let's say everyone wins out and Bama and A&M play each other in the SEC championship game, and Bama beats A&M in the SEC championship game. Where do you rank? How do you rank those 3 teams?
I think that A&M probably winds up still being ahead of Alabama because A&M's only got 1 loss. And I think also that they don't want to punish A&M for playing in the conference title game. I think Alabama is in front of Georgia because they beat A&M and they beat Georgia even with an additional loss. But that's like the nightmare scenario for the committee. And what I was going to say too, with the whole Miami Notre Dame thing, I'm convinced the crux of this issue, we've all been guilty of this, of like, we'll figure it out later. You're working on something, just put it to the side. We're going to procrastinate. I think that they have ranked them where they have with the thought of this will take care of itself. And then if they get to the very last playoff ranking and it hasn't taken care of itself, they'll go, all right, the head-to-head matters. And then they put Miami ahead of Notre Dame. I don't take the week-to-week as gospel because I find it so funny. It's usually a lot of national people, and I understand why they do this. But they have a call after every ranking, and it's like, well, you had this team here this week, but then this team. I don't put any stock in what they do week to week. I think a lot of it is just we're going to put this team here, and if there's an issue or something is contradictory, well, hopefully it'll just take care of itself. And then at the end of the day, when they get to that last ranking, that's when it's like, oh crap, we have the final tomorrow. All right, we actually have to get serious about this and figure out whatever issues are still hanging on out there. I don't think there's any consistency week to week. I think looking for that is a good way to give yourself a headache.
Yeah, you're listening to how they explain things away when they're asked very specific questions, you're going to get mad. I think the rankings, you can see some like consistency to an extent in terms of how they slot certain teams and why, aside from Notre Dame, Miami, if we're being real, like everything else is pretty consistent in terms of how they've done things this year. But once you ask them to start answering to why they've done things a certain way, you're only going to get upset. I kind of think, and I don't know how they're going to end up going about it, but if Bama at 10-2 wins the SEC over A&M, I think the biggest issue they're going to have to jumping Georgia is that Texas Tech is going to probably be the Big 12 champ, and they're going to have gotten a win over BYU, who would presumably be 11 in those standings. And it's like, how you can't really justify jumping Bama over Texas Tech when Bama beats 3 and Texas Tech beats 11 and Bama has 2 losses. Like, I think that would be hard sell for Bama to jump, I guess at that point, like 4 or 5 spots over the top of Texas Tech. So I think that might end up saving Georgia, where a 2-loss Bama team might not have a first round bye. if they win the SEC, and a one-loss Georgia team that didn't make the SEC championship game might actually end up with a first-round bye, and that would be a weird wrinkle and twist to all of it as well.
I gotta say, I would rather go to the dentist than talk about playoff hypotheticals. Usually, like maybe the last 2 weeks, sure, but it's like when the first rankings come out, I just know. It's like what Kirby Smart said on Wednesday. I think that Mike Griffith had asked him something about, like, if you're a coach looking at different job opportunities, what should be your top priorities? And Kirby, I'm paraphrasing, but Kirby basically said, I don't have the mental capacity for like going into that. That's where I am with like the hypothetical playoff stuff. I got so much going on, like my brain cannot possibly go through all those different calculations and potential.
No, I mean, the first week's ones, that's why I call it the fictional bracket, because everything that we do for the first few weeks is just so ridiculous. I think the nature of SEC scheduling this week has allowed us to kind of be like, all right, there's really more or less like 1 week's games left. And then you kind of see how SEC stuff plays out. And then, of course, conference championship weekend could get dicey for the committee. I think things could get ugly there. They need Miami to find a way to win the ACC. I'll tell you that much. I will also do an arrow pointing up. We very rarely do these recruiting shows live, just because we typically record an interview and then we end up just recording all of the show together. But because we're doing it live, I had to give a shout out to some of the live comments on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook for those that are watching along. Henry says, what's going on with the hair today, Jordan? We don't hair shame on this show, for the record, Henry. But I did want to give you a shout out, one, because anytime someone's making fun of Jordan, I'm on your side. And two, I'm pretty sure, Henry, you were the one in the offseason that said Georgia's offensive line has nothing to worry about because Dontrell Glover's coming. And if that's true, let me know if that's true. If I'm wrong, I want to make sure I give correct credit one day, but for some reason I'm connecting your name with that Dontrell Glover situation.
Yeah, he could have just kept the thoughts to himself. I really didn't think my hair was all that bad, but I guess I got it kind of sticking up in the back.
Looks fine to me. We don't hair shame. Gary Holt also gives a go Dogs from LJ. You know, if you watch on YouTube, you guys are familiar with these guys, but Wayne Mungus hits us with the dog style. He asks one of Jordan or I to give a dog style every single week on the show. So I'll oblige, because we're doing live comments on the Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show. If you're listening on podcast, you're saying, what in the world are you talking about? That's fine too.
I just wanted to say that I'm glad that doing this live, we're not used to doing that, but maybe it's easier when I'm kind of running the things behind the scenes. Ben was very nice last week. He did not mention, as we were pre-recording, that it was our second run, because we had started and I just did not hit record. But I'm incompetent enough to not hit record as we're going, but I'm competent enough to realize only like 2 minutes in. So we really didn't miss that much, but we've gone live. We've done it successfully this time, Ben. I think that's a huge accomplishment.
I mean, that's so true. The people will never get those 2 minutes. Like, you guys have no idea how much greatness was dropped in those 2 minutes. So I apologize on Jordan's behalf that we weren't ever able to give it to y'all.
I really thought it was your best 2 minutes. It's quite a shame.
All right. Predict to commit. We're getting down to it. It's funny because we got down to this crunch time and we were saying, like, I don't know how we're going to be able to get any hits here late. And it's like, I think you probably are going to get an Elijah Littlejohn hit late. I think I'm probably going to get a Tyreek Jemison hit late. So we've actually done better than you might expect in these end of cycle stages that we're in. But we're going to give it a try here as well. I'm going to have one. You're going to have one. Who's going first today?
You got it first. You let me go last time, and I felt like that made Little John easy picking. So you go first this time.
All right. Well, I'm going to go with a pretty sort of easy one. I think that this is going to give me a little bit of advantage here late, but I have put a crystal ball pick on this one over at Dawgs 24/7 earlier in the week, and that is Blake Stewart. We've talked a bunch about him already in this show, so I don't need to tell you who he is, what he's done, whatever, but this is just one based on everything that I'm hearing coming out of that Texas visit. Things are trending the right way. The fact that he scheduled that official visit immediately coming out of it, and the fact that we know Georgia might be trying to take one more defensive back in the 2026 recruiting cycle, it just makes too much sense. And he really is a great fit at Georgia. I think that this would be a spectacular ad for the Bulldogs if they're able to add him late.
Yeah, that was the top guy on our board over at Team Jordan parentheses, also Team Kip, since he subbed in for me.
Oh, now it's parentheses Team Kip. All of a sudden, we're realizing the numbers are starting to finalize, and now it's Team Kip all of a sudden.
Yeah, but no, great pick there. I think that he's got to be the top guy that neither one of us have picked yet. I think there's a really good chance he winds up being a Bulldog.
All right, Jordan, who you got?
All right, I'm going to go with another linebacker after picking Elijah Littlejohn last week, and I'm going with Terrence Pinnock. He is a Coastal Carolina commit right now. South Gwinnett standout, 6'3", 200 pounds. I think it's a situation. I'm kind of hedging my bets between Littlejohn and Pinnock. I think they're going to take, I think, one of those guys. But he's sort of been on the periphery for Georgia. You know, there's been conversations. Georgia's reached out to him. Checks a lot of boxes. Again, I think it's probably one or the other for me. Kind of just a shotgun method here at linebacker. I think they're going to add another guy, so I'm going with Terrence Pinnock. See if they could potentially wind up getting him after he's been committed to Coastal Carolina since going back to June.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of this pick. I think that it's savvy team building on your part on multiple levels. I mean, one, you're sitting pretty with Elijah Littlejohn, but as things get close to signing day, guys aren't committed. You just never really know. And so having a in-state security blanket, which, to be fair, I think the way you're approaching your predict to commit team is probably kind of the way that Georgia is approaching the recruitment of these two guys as well. I mean, they are bringing Elijah Littlejohn on that official visit, but I think that, Terrence Pinnock has been to the last 2 home games now. He's certainly interested. He hasn't been offered yet, but he's one of those guys that you don't offer yet because once you offer, he's going to be in the class. And so 2 weeks left before signing day. If you see a Terrence Pinnock offer go out, Jordan's going to hit on another one.
I did want to say this because we were talking about this before interviews this week. So Terrence Pinnock's at South Gwinnett. I don't know if you remember David Green played at South Gwinnett, but we brought up, if you remember, if you followed Georgia in those early 2000s, the talking point that was brought up all the time. Did you guys know David Pollock and David Green? They grew up playing rec league together. It was like something that got brought up all the time. I was gonna kind of test you, Ben. Can you think of other things that were repeatedly brought up about players? The only other one I can think of was, hey, Jake Fromm. He played in the Little League World Series. It was like every other game. Anything else like that come to
I mean, the one that happens now that's Georgia relevant is the Matt Stafford, Clayton Kershaw played at the same high school. Like that one gets brought up all the time. And now Scotty Scheffler he was after them, but he went to the same high school as well. So that one always gets brought up. I was going to say the Jake Fromm Little League highlights one, like that one definitely always gets brought up. I'm trying to think. There's gotta be some that I'm not thinking of here. And I'm just thinking in the Georgia world, I'm sure that there's some like that everywhere else where they're always bringing it up. But we're about to be entering a window where they're probably going to be doing a lot of these guys are brothers for Georgia. Like if Nnamdi and Ekene are both playing at the same time, we're going to be getting a lot of that.
If you're watching, if you're listening to this, comment and let us know. And the next time when we do our game reaction on Saturday, if you guys hit us with some we're forgetting about, we'll read them because I got a good laugh out of that when we were talking about it on Monday.
Yeah, those are fun. All right. Another great show. Appreciate everyone who listened, whether you were listening on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We appreciate you wherever it is that you're watching or listening. Please subscribe in those locations. Please give us a like, a thumbs up. We do thank you very, very much for that. Jordan, please hit them again with the flash sale that we've got going through the end of November 20th.
Yeah, 75% off. So if you're listening to this or watching on Thursday, get on it because it ends Thursday at midnight. But we'll have some more stuff right around the corner for Black Friday. But jump on board. It'll be a fun one. And Ben, the only other thing I was going to add just from what we were just talking about, I don't know that it's been talked about a ton, but like Gunnar Stockton, is from Tiger, Georgia and owns cows. But I don't think that's really been talked about a ton during those games.
Gunnar Stockton's cows probably have been brought up a fair share. I haven't been watching enough of it. And a lot of times when I do the rewatch, if I'm watching the TV copy, I just fast forward through any of the non-play spots. But that Gunnar Stockton's cows feels like it's a regular.
and his truck. And I'll shout out Marty Smith. He
I
put me
just
going.
thought of one. Anytime Peyton Manning's around, Kirby Smart picking off Peyton Manning. They did it again this weekend because he was in town for Arch Manning, and I saw when I watched the TV copy that they showed Kirby Smart picking off Peyton.
That's a great one. That is a fantastic one. And yeah, I was just going to mention Marty Smith recorded. It looks like something that'll be on SEC Nation on Saturday. He was riding around with Gunner, so the truck is still very much prevalent when you talk about Gunner Stockton.
Those two guys seem like they're cut from the same cloth, Marty Smith and Gunner Stockton. That'll be good TV. All right, I hope everyone enjoyed a little bit of an impromptu Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show. Maybe a little more laid back, maybe not as serious, but a lot of info going on. We will have a signing day show. We're not exactly sure yet, just to prep people that are listening for this, whether it will be day of, day after. We'll have to figure all of that out just with timing of if Kirby Smart does a press conference or not, which probably will be dictated by does Georgia make the SEC championship game or not. So some of that stuff is out of our control. But in some capacity, we are going to have a signing day special where we will have guys from the 2026 recruiting class that have signed come on the show, connect with them, break down the entire class and how things unfold for that first Wednesday in December. Jordan, I appreciate you. Any final thoughts? Any other final Charlotte takes before we call it a day?
Georgia a lot, Charlotte a little.
Yeah, give me that. I think it's Georgia minus 43.5.
I'm going to say Georgia does not cover, but Georgia wins.
Boo.
Georgia wins 42-0. It's a snoozer, Ben. What about you?
I'll say Georgia's up 42-0 with Gunner. He's accounted for 3 passing, 3 rushing, and then Ryan Puglisi gets one late. And so they win 49-0 or 49-3 maybe if Charlotte steals a field goal somewhere in there. All right. Appreciate everybody. We'll see you in a couple weeks for another Stay Wolk UGA recruiting show, but obviously we'll be back next week to be talking the Georgia Tech game that's happening on Black Friday. So I am your host, Benjamin Wolk, for Jordan Hill. We appreciate y'all, and we will see y'all next time.